Hey everyone, welcome to Recess, brought to you by Roadmunk. We're so glad you could take a break with us today. My name is Liz, and I'm the event manager at Roadmunk, and I'll be hosting our Recess session. Along with Recess, Roadmunk also has a podcast called Product to Product that you can subscribe to on your preferred podcasting platform. As for Recess, we'll be recording this live session, but we will also be posting the recording plus a summary with time codes on our Medium page in the coming days. Feel free to let us know where you're from, what company you're at, and what role you're in the chat, as well as letting us know if you're a repeat attendee, as we love seeing that. Today, one of my colleagues on the marketing team, Shannon, will be moderating. She'll be taking your questions, so feel free to send them in throughout this conversation, and we'll answer them in the last 10 minutes of this 30-minute session. To submit a question, please use the Q&A box, which should be located on your Zoom sort of controls. It's usually at the bottom of your screen. Okay, let's get started. Today we have Emily from Indigo Ag. Welcome, Emily.
Hi, happy to be here.
Yeah, so excited that you're able to be on Recess. Emily is currently a senior product manager at Indigo Ag. And Emily, to get this conversation started, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got involved with product?
Yeah, happy to. So I've been a product manager. Oh boy, I don't want to date myself too much, but I've been a product manager. I'm in the 5 to 10 year range of experience, right? And I got into product. I went to school for English. I have an English degree, and I happened to be able to wiggle my way into really teching out that English degree. I became a tech writer. I took a bunch of HTML courses and coding courses, web design, etc. So right out of school, I was actually a tech writing intern at a tech startup. And so naturally I found, as at a startup, there's lots of things that people need help with. And so I was helping out the project managers, the engineers, the business analysts, and I ended up getting hired full-time, because when you're helpful and you solve problems for people, people really want you to stick around. So I became a business analyst, and then quickly, startup life, right? I jumped into a project management role. And then I started realizing the things that the customers were requesting were consistent between each other. And I was like, why are we customizing these things just for these one customers? Why don't we just build it into our base product, right? And so I would go to the engineering team and talk to them, and that's how I fell into product. And I do hear that story actually quite a bit, that people sort of accidentally find themselves doing a product role. I didn't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
That they don't teach you that stuff in school, but that's how I ended up in product. But otherwise, I love tech. Once you're in tech, you pretty much stay there. And so I'm a big techie. I love to read, doing a lot of reading now in the pandemic. I have a new paint by numbers kit set up, so that's a lot of fun.
Exciting.
Just trying to stay busy. But it's been fun navigating product life remotely since we all went remote.
What would you say is one of the most interesting things you've encountered remote?
I would say the way that the communication changed, like right away, night and day, right? We did a lot of stuff in person. Booking rooms was a lot harder. So finding meeting times was a lot harder, but now it's all about asynchronous. You need to write everything down. If you don't write something down, the only people that are going to know about that piece of information are the people that are in the Zoom room with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to take notes. You need to not just post those notes into Slack. They have to be in some sort of asynchronous place that's searchable.
Mm-hmm.
We use Confluence. And that's really been a big game changer for us. And then, of course, now that everyone's writing everything down, you're inundated. There's so much to consume. So it's about being brief, bullet points. You literally cannot oversimplify enough. If your email is a novel, no one's going to read it right now. Everyone's overwhelmed.
Yeah. That's true. I'm sure your degree in English is helping you a lot right now, being one of the more succinct people.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. You got to cut down all the fluff words in your content if you're really trying to get it across. I'd also say video is a fantastic option right now, and not just Zoom video, but asynchronous. So Wistia, Drift video. There's a lot of different options out there for recording little clips and things, and being able to have people consume that when they can.
Yeah, video is definitely a nice way to consume media now. You currently work at Indigo Ag. Can you give us a high-level overview of the company and how your role specifically fits into the organization?
Yeah, happy to. Indigo, we build products for farmers, and we have our hands in the whole product life cycle for farmers. So pre-plant and all the way to transportation of grain to a buyer's facility, and then of course the sale in between, the sale of actual grain from a farmer. And that's where I fit into the life cycle, but we have a bunch of different products. We have transport, which you can kind of, I don't know if I can drop the name, but you can, it's kind of like Uber for grain, where you can have someone else transport your grain to your buyer for you if it's too far, or you just don't want to, or you don't have your own trucks. And then grain marketplace, which is what I work on. It connects growers and farmers to different buyers. They might just be selling usually to the buyer down the street. And so now they have the opportunity to connect with a bunch of buyers, including those that might have been outside their comfort range, but they might get a better price, right? And then, of course, we have Indigo Carbon, which is a new initiative. I say new, but it was launched last year, where we're trying to really center farmers as the heroes of the climate change story, because ultimately you can take carbon out of the air and stick it back into the soil through agriculture. I don't think this has come up actually a lot in the news recently, but it's a really exciting opportunity for not only farmers to have healthier soil and grow better crops, but to literally take carbon that has been obviously pumped out into the air and put it back into the earth. So we want to incentivize farmers to do that, right? Because otherwise it's expensive to do it on their own.
Yeah, that's very revolutionary. As someone who doesn't know a ton about farming, that seems incredible that they're actually able to do that. And sort of jumping off this sustainability theme, that's a huge area, it seems like, for Indigo. Has the way you made decisions as a product manager changed since joining Indigo? Do you try to weave sustainability more into your decision-making process?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a cornerstone of our mission. It's one of our pillars. The big thing about becoming a farmer that uses regenerative practices is you do take a pay cut the first few years. And so that's a really important thing that I need to be thinking about, even though I'm not a part of the Indigo Carbon product. I don't work directly on it, but we have growers that are selling, and sorry if I use grower and farmer interchangeably. We refer to them as growers, but that's a lot of people just, they're farmers, right? When they're selling their grain through the grain marketplace that I work on, they might be selling grain that they've worked extra hard this year to do regenerative practices, and they should get paid for that. So how do we make sure that that gets highlighted? How do we make sure that these sustainability efforts that our customers are doing can get worked into our product as much as possible? And so I'd say that that's particularly important. But even in how I PM from a sustainability standpoint, I mean, it's just top of mind when your product is so focused on it. It's been interesting since we went remote. It's amazing how much the carbon footprint of just your commute and everything starts to go down. But while we were in the office, I mean, Indigo is all about a lot of sustainable practices in terms of making sure we're recycling and composting and everything like that as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And you talk about Indigo has these sort of different stages. Like you're sounding like you're more at the beginning of the funnel when you're helping the growers in the marketplace sell their grain or their product, and then they sort of move down the funnel. And you talked a little bit about, like, even though you're not with Indigo Carbon, you still have to think about that team and how it affects the farmer. And I guess, how do you sort of work interdepartmentally at Indigo to make sure that the user experience is, I guess, the same sort of experience from the start to the end, and that it all sort of connects together? Because it seems like it's such a huge initiative.
It really is. And it's tough. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna be like, we have it figured out. No, I mean, I will say the design team is actually really core in making sure that that happens. We have a shared component library. That's huge. I
Mhm.
mean, just the look and feel of everything shouldn't be wildly different from when you go use Indigo Carbon products to when you log into Indigo Marketplace. So that's pretty key. But Indigo, as much as possible, we are trying to make sure that each team is staying as up to date and in sync as possible. We have regular all
Mhm.
hands. It's been tough since we went remote, right? Before
Yeah.
you'd be able to like walk by someone and be like, "Hey, what are you working on?" and have that organic conversation, in the kitchen or somewhere like that. So now we kind of you have to force that stuff.
Mhm.
And relationships that you may have established before you went remote, making sure that you reach out and have those conversations regularly, even though you're not running into them in the hallway, right?
Yeah.
It's a tough one. That's definitely a something that I think everyone can get better at.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely like the work from home is, since it takes away all those sort of serendipitous run-ins in the office.
Yeah.
Like you said, it has to be very intentional now when you reach out to someone. You have to have a purpose and you have to tell them why. You have to
Yeah.
make
It's
it
like,
very
hi.
like,
Yeah. It's like, what do
this is
you
what we're
want?
connecting on.
Right.
um, since you mostly work with growers, and then pre-interview you mentioned that they are extremely busy people, and we talked a little bit about collecting feedback from them and how it can be a little bit tricky. So how do you collect user feedback, and do you have any advice for people who also might be working with a really busy and just tricky user base to like get in touch with and stay in touch with?
Yeah. This was something we struggled with quite a bit, and we've actually made some fantastic improvements in the last few months.
Mhm.
The biggest thing is we hired someone specifically to do this. You try to
Nice.
avoid it, right? You want the product managers and the UX, designers to be able to gather this stuff themselves.
Mhm.
And you still should push for that. And I still, talk to growers and our grain marketing advisors, et cetera. But
Mhm.
we hired a user researcher who spends her entire day talking to farmers and getting things scheduled, so she's always talking
Yeah.
to farmers, and that's been revolutionary. I mean, it's
Mhm.
worth the investment is all I can say there. But before we had someone dedicated to lining all this stuff up and talking to them, when your user base is super busy, and especially like
Mhm.
farmers, we're not going to get them on a Zoom, right? They're not going to hop on a Zoom with us. That's not going to happen. But we can get them on a phone call, and we'd have to learn these really interesting habits of theirs. So, for example, farmers always have usually like one office day a week where they're in the office,
Okay.
they're doing paperwork that they have to do anyways. And that's the day you want to get them, right? Because they're in the office, they're not out in the field where they don't have any service.
Yeah.
Um, Also hopping onto regularly scheduled calls. I mean, I know that this is a good tactic for anybody with a busy customer base.
Mhm.
If your customer success manager has a check-in with them scheduled, being able to get in there, not only is it beneficial to you, but the customer success
Mhm.
manager, if that customer has feedback for a product, it's super empowering, obviously, to be like, hey, I have the person who built it right here. You can talk their ear off, right, and give them feedback. And then, yeah, again, going back to the habits, one thing that's interesting is we could actually check the weather in terms of when we'd be able to contact farmers, right? Rainy days,
Oh.
they're
Yeah.
likely not out in the field. Hail, they're actually probably really busy trying to protect their crops, depending on how bad the weather might be. So,
Mhm.
for example, there was some really bad storms out west a few weeks ago,
Mhm.
and a lot of stuff was lost. But it was actually unfortunate. I mean, it was unfortunate, but it was a good time to talk to them because they
Mhm.
were in, you know, recovery mode. They were figuring out, okay, now what are we going to do? How are we going to plan this? And it was a good time to be able to listen to those pain points and see if there was anything we could actually do about it.
Yeah, it sounds like from everything you said that you really got to understand your user base, because like toning or like honing in on, oh my gosh, it's raining in X part and we have a grower here. This would be a perfect time for us to connect. And so I feel like that's such like great advice, is to really know sort of your user's schedule and how they work. And then
Hmm.
that'll help you be successful. And it also might make them more willing to have, say, like a half-hour chat. Um,
Yeah.
You mentioned now that you have a user researcher. How does the user researcher work with the product team? Are they on the product team specifically, or are they kind of on the data team? Do you have a data team? How has that integration happened?
Yeah, it's a good question. They report to the VP of design. So they're on the design team technically, which is fantastic because they're able to funnel all of their user findings right to the UX designers. So our user researcher, her name's Chris, she's absolutely fantastic. And really she is embedded in the product team, and that the design and product team are, that we're at the hip, we're linked at the hip. We're constantly talking. We have design reviews every week, I think at this point. They were every other week for a while, and she would present her findings. We also have something, and this is really cool, we have something called Context Tuesday. And so Tuesday mornings, 9:30 a.m. every week, she comes and she takes up a piece of the presentation. I have other guests as well, but it's all about sharing context with the engineering team, the product team, designers, everyone, and anyone who wants to come really in the company. And it's all focused around, we're not going to talk about projects. We're not going to talk about milestones and where are we in development. We're going to talk about, what did we learn this week? What's something that you don't know about in terms of our customers? And she'll bring clips from her phone calls, which is amazing, because then we can actually hear firsthand from the customers. And she'll talk about what we're going to be testing next, because she's constantly lining stuff up.
That's really cool. And it's also really great that she also brings in teams like engineering. Sometimes with product, there's sometimes that disconnect where the product manager, or I guess in this case too, the user researcher, is doing all this research, and then you prioritize your decisions and then kind of loop in engineering. You're like, hey, we think that this should move forward based on XYZ feedback that we've heard. Have you gotten any feedback from the engineering team about them like being included in this process?
Oh yeah, it's from the beginning when I joined Indigo about 1.5 years ago. It's always been about making sure that the engineers have context. So they need to be included right from the beginning of a project on the why. We actually have a part of our product development lifecycle, and this is actually something I learned at Drift and took it with me through the couple companies I've been at. We do something called story time. So right at the beginning of a project, you talk about the why. You don't jump into solutioning. You don't jump into, okay, what are the designs? What are the buttons? How are we going to do this? It is, who's having the problem? What is the problem? Why are we trying to solve it? Why do they care about it? All the little nuance and details. And you give yourself that space with the engineering team and the designer and the people who are going to be building it. Because when you do that up front, all the little micro decisions that you have to make later, they don't fall on the product manager, right? They might, you might double check, it's probably a good idea, but for the most part, it's like, oh, I know I can't put this drop down here this way because they're going to need to be able to access this information later, XYZ, right? Like they're able to have the context that lets them be autonomous in decision making.
That's so awesome. I also just like the title, how you call it story time, because it's true, like everything is kind of a story like that you're doing for the user and the customer and helping them succeed with your product. Go ahead.
And I do find that if we skip that, we have to come back to it, right? And even we just had a project where we had a bigger story time that kind of encapsulated a bunch of different projects. And we started down the path, all right, we're developing, we're building, we're designing. And then we actually had to come back and have a smaller story time specifically about one piece of the project because it got too diluted and people were like, why are we doing this again? And as soon as you hear that, as soon as like, wait, why? You should come back to that and you should reset and make sure everyone understands why you're working on what you're working on.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I feel like you save yourself a lot of sort of like headaches down the line if you're able to, like, everyone knows, like, this is why we're doing this. This is why this is happening this way.
Absolutely.
We're starting to get some questions come in. Awesome. So one of the first ones says, Emily, how has your team adapted to UX without in-person user time?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. We didn't have a lot of in-person user time before, but there was actually some on-site visits that we did about 3 months before the pandemic hit, where we were able to go visit a bunch of farmers. And I will say, like, we sent the entire product team, the entire UX team out to visit these farmers, Nebraska, Kansas. We went to a bunch of different places, and that sustained us quite a bit. As much as agriculture is changing, it's been pretty stuck in its ways for the last couple decades, right? So we got a lot of feedback that we've been able to use and sustain. I know that there's other industries. I've been in MarTech, it's changing constantly, and so that can be harder. I mean, you should be able to, everyone's connecting remotely at this point. It's just, we've got to make it work, right? Whether it's Zoom or FaceTime, honestly, getting comfortable with your customers, for top customers who love your product, things like texting and chat. We've had shared Slack rooms in the past with certain, customers that are really engaged. But it's obviously tough. There's nothing better than in person, but yeah.
Yes. So sort of building on feedback, someone's asking, how do you gather and weigh feedback from people across the organization? AKA, do you have one central repository to maintain feedback from different parts of the business?
Oh, that's a really good question. I've dreamed of that in the past. In fact, there are products out there where you can take a bunch of different sources of feedback and aggregate it and tag it. And, even if you don't use the product, you could do a spreadsheet of that and be like, this is this type feedback from this person, and this is weighted this way. And you could totally set all that up. Honestly, so much of product management is being able to say wow, that is fantastic feedback. I'm going to take that and go talk about it right now with the engineers. And we're going to see if we can take that feedback and make it happen. And being able to kind of sort other pieces of feedback and say, we're going to file this one away, whether it's on the wiki or in a backlog item, for future use. And the amount of effort it takes to aggregate feedback, keep track of it, and then not have it get out of date so that it's actually actionable. So much stuff. I mean, I found, I'm thinking back to when I first became a PM, I'm I can't lose all of this information. It's so valuable, right? But so much stuff just ends up floating down and becoming not important over time. And if it's not being talked about constantly by customers and by internal users, then it's likely a flavor of the month or something's on fire real quick, and maybe it's worth putting it out. But most of the time, the important things float to the top.
Yeah.
That's a really good question.
It's a good question. Also, this is a little bit of a shameless plug, but if you do need a central tool, Roadmunk does have a feedback portal or a feedback area and a prioritization tool. So that's my shameless plug of the of the session. But if anyone's interested.
Yeah, I mean, I've used Trello in the past too. I mean, there's lots of different ways of doing it. But yeah,
it can build. And it can be tough. Someone else asked, your org sounds really fascinating from a logistics standpoint. Are your customers essentially the growers? Do you end up developing tools and services for other groups and stakeholders as part of the end service you provide to growers?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, because we're looking at the entire agriculture sort of ecosystem, growers are our number one, I'd say. I focus on the grower primarily. I work on pricing tools for growers. But we obviously also, it's a marketplace, so we service the buyer side too. And there needs to be buyer incentive for why they want to buy grain off of marketplace, right? So buyers as well as grain marketing advisors. And you can think of those as, they're almost like financial specialists that growers can engage with, that the grain marketing advisors, they're very focused on how am I going to get the best price for this grain. They'll group growers together and sell grain in bulk. They'll do specific things with the markets and futures pricing, so that way they can get the best price on the market. And so being able to work with grain marketing advisors is also super important because they work with a lot of growers. So we have an entire product team dedicated to helping those out. But growers, GMAs, buyers, and then honestly, I spend a lot of time with our internal users because they're servicing and helping growers out a lot. Growers really like to talk on the phone. I mean, it's how they do business today. And so if we can enable the people that they're on the phone with, then ultimately we're making the growers happier too.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think in a lot of industries, and maybe it's also just I'm in the millennial age group, that phone calls are somewhat scary sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's great that you're able to identify like our market really likes the phone. We're going to use the phone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've thought about like putting a chat in the in Marketplace, but ultimately they just want to pick up the phone and get the answer. So they don't like email. They hate email. So we've had to really pull back on email. Text message notifications are good. It's all just about finding, the right communication style with your group.
Yeah. We have another question that's asking, how has your organization delineated responsibilities between project manager and product manager when it comes to requirement gathering?
Yeah, great question, because I actually work hand in hand with a project manager. And the big difference is going to be about what are the software product requirements? So what are the products that you're building? What do the stakeholders need, et cetera, to actually be able to solve the problem in the software? So I'm emphasizing like software requirements, right? And then the project manager helps me get those. What I mean by that is we have a bunch of different departments and cross-team collaboration that has to happen, both from a business standpoint, so like fulfillment and logistics and pricing and finance and legal, right? Everyone has requirements. And then we also have technical dependencies. So we have a lot of microservices. And so we need downstream and upstream data to flow in a way that is happy and sensical and not going to break everything. So my project manager keeps me sane in that she'll help coordinate the various meetings and pieces of communication that have to happen. She also will keep us on track for the software development lifecycle, because you can kind of get stuck in one spot, like in lo-fi designing, for example. You can just rev on that forever. And so she obviously sticks to the timeline. She's like, hey, you said we were going to be done with this. What are you doing? Right. But it's a partnership and it's push-pull. So there are certain things that each person owns, but just like with your designer, like sometimes the lines are a little blurred and you have each other's backs. But I will say, like, without a project manager, that coordination and being able to get all those requirements from the different teams, that would be very, very difficult on my own.
Yeah, it sounds like a really great collaboration. I think that is a very common question, because I sometimes feel like, especially in startups, it's just the product manager, like you said, sometimes the startups, you're doing everything, right?
Yeah.
So it's always interesting to hear like how that relationship works when you're able to have that, and how beneficial it can be and supportive.
It really is. And I will say I feel spoiled having a project manager, because I've obviously worked in startups where you do the project management, you do both, right? But being able to have one, we deploy, not every product manager has a project manager at Indigo. They're deployed as needed per project. But it's really wonderful when you are able to do that. I mean, it unsticks the problem of, oh, the legal team didn't know about this thing, right? So if you're seeing problems like that in your org, you might want to think about deploying a project manager or getting one.
Yes. So we have about a minute left of our session, and to wrap up, what is one piece of advice you'd give to a PM who eventually wants to become a product leader in their org? You've had many years of product experience. What advice would you give?
Again, coming back to how I got into product, being helpful. It can come back and shoot you in the foot, and then all of a sudden you're the person everyone goes to and you can't do your job. So you have to protect your time. But if you are a person that when people come to you, they know that they can get a clear answer, or you'll point them to the right person, there's nothing more valuable than that. And especially if you're interested on the product side, being able to do that for both your business stakeholders who need things translated from technical stakeholders and vice versa. I mean, you're absolutely invaluable, and people will continue to look to you for clarity and for being able to unstick and move forward. And it's only going to bring you good things.
That's really good advice. Thank you, Emily. As we wind down our session, again, I want to thank Emily for being so generous with her time and being a guest on Recess, and you, the viewer, for attending. Emily, where can people find you? LinkedIn, Medium, Twitter?
Yeah, Twitter. I'm on Twitter. Emily Myas, my name. I am on LinkedIn as well. So go ahead and add me. Would love to connect. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. We will be posting this recording and a summary with time codes on Medium, so look forward to that. Our next recess session will be on October 13th, and we look forward to having you join us. Thank you again, everyone, for dropping by. I did have one question about Roadmunk, so if anyone would like to stick around for that, it is running over time. I'm happy to answer that. I just want to say thank you again, everyone. And Emily, it was a great conversation. Had a great time talking
Yeah,
with you.
thank you so much, Liz and Shannon. Really appreciate it. This was
All
fun.
right. Thank you.